We're just really happy to have you here today for our speaker, Jim Graves, a longtime collector and friend of the Postcard Club. And he was at a meeting several years ago that I attended. I didn't know he was going to be a speaker. But he talked, and I went up to him afterwards and I said, you know, it'd be great if you could do one of our club meetings at the show. And well, sure, he'd be glad to. So, you know, a lot of times it's just asking somebody to do something rather than for them to come up and volunteer. But in any case, Jim, we're delighted to have you. He's a Wichita native. His wife, Karen, usually is by his side, maybe a little bit early today for Karen. But we thank you for being here. I'll be quiet and we'll get on with the show. Jim?
Thank you, Hal. A couple of corrections on this speech. I hope it's not boring. I'm not a Wichita native. I was born in St. Louis and moved to southeast Kansas, Independence, and then came to Wichita in 1971 when I got out of the service. I was kind of hesitant about doing this, but Hal made lots of promises. And one of them that I would have coffee and donuts this morning. And I came in early just so I could get and there wasn't any. The other thing was in his write-up in the club newsletter, he said I was going to talk about the sunflower bricks from Salina. And for those of you that collect bricks, you know that if I'm going to talk about them, I'm not going to say very much because Salina never made sunflower bricks. But anyway, he tried hard and I'm here. The talk today is about bricks and brickyards, the making of America. As you notice, there are a lot of different styles of bricks that were made in America, many thousands more than this. This is an example. A long, long time ago, and only a short distance away, my family went to visit a friend of my folks. And in the basement of their house, they had a wall with bricks set on edge with the names written on them. And I asked, and they said, oh, these are all the different towns that we lived in. And I looked at them and thought, that would make a really neat fireplace. And so when we got home, I went out and looked in the sidewalk that went from our backyard to the alley and found 12 different kinds of brick in the sidewalk, which I immediately removed to the consternation of my parents. And a collection was started. Now, I don't really remember how I got into postcards, but I suspect that eBay is to blame. Because those of you that work on eBay know that if you type in something like brick, you'll get 1,000 different things show up, only one or two of which you want. And I'm sure that postcards showed up on eBay before I saw them anyplace else. But I was intrigued, and shortly thereafter, the Wichita Postcard Club was having their annual show. And I came down and went through, each dealer said, well, what do you collect? And I said, brickyards. And they all said, huh? But occasionally someone would say, oh yeah, I've got some over here in manufacturers or whatever. And I think I came out with about 10 or 15 cards that first show. And I was ecstatic. I was hooked, so to say. Making brick is thousands of years old. The original bricks were simply mud shaped into a square or rectangle, whatever they wanted, and laid out in the sun to dry. The Egyptians made brick like this 3,000 years ago, and a lot of the other cultures did it earlier than that. Now, these cards are not that old, but the technique they use is exactly the same as they did 3,000 years ago. My sister brought me a piece of brick from a mud pyramid in Egypt. It was about 2,500 years old, and when you looked at it, you could still see the straw mixed in with the clay that they used to bind them together. The only problem with mud brick is moisture. And if you can imagine building a mud brick house in Kansas, you'd know that it wouldn't last a season before it got washed away. And in fact, even in dry places like Arizona and Mexico, they end up making fresh mud and covering the outside of it, called adobe. Someone figured out that if you fired these mud bricks, it made them harder and more durable. Not sure exactly when this happened, but it's been around for quite a while. Yeah, the pictures here, two of them show horse-powered brick machines. And these could be any time from the early times down to, 1920, because there were a lot of yards that didn't have the money to mechanize their operation. The car to the upper right is a steam-powered brickyard, but the process is exactly the same. They had a mold that they stuck in the brick machine, which is that thing in the back with a pole on it. And as a horse walked around in a circle, it had an auger that pressed the brick down or the clay down into these molds. They pulled the mold out, dumped it out on the ground, and then stuck the mold back in and started over again. The bricks themselves were laid out in the sun to dry, and then once they were dried, they were fired. These two yards are from the New York area. They had a little bit different system. They're called pallet yards. And in this case, when they made the brick, the upper left picture, you can see the pallets. They were stacked on wooden boards and carried out and set in stacks to dry. And once they were dry enough to be handled, they were laid out flat on the ground to dry, and they would turn them from side to side and over and everything until they were totally dry. And then they would stack them up in long stacks and put little board peak covers over them so that when it rained, it kept them dry. Once they were all thoroughly dry, then they would take them and put them and stack them in the kiln and fire them. There's a couple of pictures of more modern brick plants. The upper one there, you can see the round dome buildings, which are called beehive kilns. The bricks were made in the building on the right, dried, and then stacked in the beehive kilns by hand. They had a person hired that was in charge of the firing, and he would light a fire and keep it going for about a week to get the temperature up to around 2,000 degrees. Then they would let the fires go out, let the kiln cool down, and then unload the brick by hand. The one on the right is a more modern plant where everything is indoors. And the long buildings were a tunnel type kiln, which instead of being stacked in like they do there, they were put on a car and pushed through, and the fire was kept running all the time. And in the middle of the kiln, and then it gradually warmed and heated up as it went in till it got to the firing point, and then once it was fired, It proceeded on out of that heat zone into the cooling zone, and it cooled down to where you could handle the bricks and they would unload the cart and start over again. This is what caused the difference between those two cards. Around 1850, someone patented a horizontal brick machine. The ones that you saw with the horsepower ones were verticals. Okay. This thing works the same way. It's got a large screw that you dump the clay and water in a hopper, and this screw mixes it and moves it through. The large hole on the left side actually held a die which formed the shape of the brick that you wanted. So you could make them any size and shape that you wanted. And that was how they put the holes in the bricks too. There was a bar in that die that corresponded with the holes. And so they just pressed the hole in as they went. The clay came out as a solid stream, kind of like squeezing toothpaste. And the card on the right, you can see the bottom left of this is that tube of clay coming out. And then the strange looking round gadget is the cutter that cuts it into individual bricks. So the thickness of the shape of the brick is determined by the pug mill, and the thickness of the brick is determined by the cutter. They used like piano wire to cut these, and these wires would occasionally break. And then the guy standing behind there would grab these pieces that were the wrong size and toss them in a return chute, and that would get returned back and made into a brick again. This is a picture of a modern brick plant, Perla, Arkansas, the Acme Brick Company, the famous Acme. I guess they made everything, didn't they? This is kind of interesting because in the upper right, you can see the beehive kilns centered around the building. This was the old plant. And then as they grew, they added a new plant, which is that long building just to the left of it. This building has all of the equipment to make the brick, as well as a tunnel dryer, which dried the brick on carts. And then once they were dry, they were pushed over to the other tunnel, which was a kiln, and fired. The bricks came in as clay at the one end and ended up as brick coming out the other end of the thing. As you can see, they've got large stacks of brick all over the place there. It's kind of interesting when you look at cards, the cards that are labeled as brick plants occasionally have piles of brick in front of them, but not always. In fact, usually not. But the cards that are labeled brick and tile or tile cards almost always have this large picture of the tile yard in front of the plant showing all the different kinds of tile that they made. It's kind of fascinating watching tile being made because they did it with a vertical mill rather than a horizontal one. If you can imagine these things, they made tile up to 36 inches in diameter. And if you extruded something like that laying on its side, it would collapse. So they put the vertical mill in a room above where they worked, and then this column of clay came down and a cutter cut the tile into whatever thickness that they wanted. I was at a plant where they were doing this, and it was interesting to see that they cut about a 3-inch piece at the bottom of each one of these big tiles, so that this tile is sitting on a ring about 3 inches thick. And I said, why do you do this? And they said, well, because when we fire these, the stresses set up in firing causes that bottom piece to crack. And so by making it a separate piece, we save the piece that's on top. So every piece of tile that they made, there was another ring that they threw away. I pulled these two cards because I originally thought they were the same picture that they had just played around with a little bit. But we looked at them and finally decided that there was the same view, but at different times. The Builders Brick Company in Hooper, Nebraska, and they were unusual in that they had these little wooden skirts or roofs around the buildings. I can't imagine why they did these because, as I said, they get the temperature in these kilns up to close to 2,000 degrees. And I would think that would be a horrible fire hazard. This is all the same picture. If you look closely, there are a couple of little things in all these pictures that are there. And then some of the material in the foreground and some of the material in the background has been changed. I suspect that the upper right card is the original card because there are things missing out of the other two that are in that one. But I like that night scene. I doubt that they had fire like that coming out of the smokestacks, but it certainly makes a thrilling picture to look at. This was in Pittsburgh, Kansas. This is a couple of beehive kilns. The upper one is from a 1911 postcard, and the one on the bottom was a new card. I think it was in the 60s. So they haven't changed any in 50, 60 years. And in fact, they haven't changed any uh, since the first inception. The steel bands are to keep them from collapsing because as they heat up, the brick expand, and then as they cool down, they contract. They're really large. You don't get much of a perspective on these. They might be 35 or 40 feet across and can put 50 or 60,000 bricks in one kiln. Both of these were coal fired. They also used wood, natural gas, and a few used oil. Natural gas was big in the Midwest because we had a lot of it, and it was a big incentive to attract business to your town if you could give them free or almost free natural gas. I talked to people that lived out where they had free gas, and they said, well, you know, in the summertime when it got hot, you didn't turn off the heater, you just opened the windows. I love the pictures of workers. You don't find a lot of them, but a lot of them that you do find are marked. The right-hand picture there, there's a little X by one guy, and it says on the back, you know, here I am with the rest of the gang. Now, that other picture, that must have been a big yard because that's a lot of people there. This other one is about what you normally see in a relatively small yard. It was all handwork, and so you had lots of laborers. One of the rare cards that you find are workers holding bricks that you can tell where they came from. Now, you see a lot of them with wheelbarrows with bricks on them, but you can't tell what they are. This one is nice. It's a Purrington paver, and it came from the Purrington Paving Brick Company in Galesburg, Illinois. I've seen a couple of other 8 by 10 photos from the Purrington plant where you could also see the names of the bricks on them. Okay, these interesting looking guys are holding bricks that say Beech Creek, Hearth and Bosch from the Penn Brick Company in Beech Creek, Pennsylvania. And a comment was made when we were making these up that that's a strange looking brick. And I said, well, the name on it tells the story. These are fire brick, and fire brick are made to exacting specifications so that one person's fire brick will fit in another person's structure. So if you buy a brick from one company and you need to replace some, you don't have to go back to the original manufacturer. You can buy them from somebody else. But fire brick are exposed to a wide variety of temperatures, and they make the bricks to uh, certain specifications. The hearth and Bosch on this indicates that this was made for a steel blast furnace, and it was made for the temperature range of two parts of the furnace, the hearth and the Bosch. And when you start looking at fire brick, you'll see all kinds of strange names on these things, like bung and end wall and roof and tip top. All these were parts of a blast furnace. So they could tell by looking at the brick brand what area the brick was supposed to be used in. A couple of pictures of construction. You don't see a lot of them, but the guys on the left there are building a new smokestack. Brickyards are kind of interesting. They usually either have square smokestacks or round ones. This one's got both, so I don't know what they were thinking. The card on the right, they're not building beehive kilns, they're building tunnels. So this would be for one of them is smaller than the other, so I'm assuming that one of them is a dryer tunnel, and then the other one is the tunnel that they fired the bricks in. I pulled this card because I bought this on eBay, and it was, interior of a brick plant, which you don't see a lot of. And I got the bid, and I emailed the guy and said, "Have you got any other brickyard postcards?" He said, "Well, I have 12 more from the Hancock Brick and Tile Company." And I said, "Huh?" I said, "Yeah, it's a whole set showing the inside, the outside, the delivery system, and all kinds of stuff." So I immediately jumped on it and bought the whole set. Probably it's the only set in existence, but I was really thrilled, and I guess it never hurts to ask when you buy something if they've got anything else that you might be interested in. Disasters. Postcards love disasters, and you can find them for all kinds of things. Fires were common in brickyards because of the high temperatures that they used to fire the bricks. And the biweekly trade magazines from the early 1900s down into the 30s usually had a page of whose brick plant burned down that week. It was amazing the number of them. They also told whether they were insured, which a good portion of them were self-insured, or they were insured for considerably less than what the loss was. Now, the one on the left is from 1950. So this is not something that happened just in the old days, but it happened in modern days as well. And the one on the right is a postally used card from 1915 that Hal found for me at one of our shows. I didn't recognize what it was until I got to looking at it because the label is almost obscured at the bottom. What you see in there are the machines that were used to stamp the names on the bricks. They're called represses, and they would cut the bricks into the standard shape or whatever they wanted. And then a separate process these presses would press 2 bricks at a time. So they had a guy standing at each one of these presses that would grab these 2 brick blanks, stick them in the machine, pull his hands out of the way. A press would come down, exerting I don't know how many tons of pressure. It would go up, he'd reach in, grab the 2 bricks, pull them out, and put 2 in. Now, I assume that the presses had some kind of an activation switch because I've seen a similar kind of thing with paper cutters where you had to grab a hold of something with both hands before it would cut the paper. But of course, back in those days, they didn't worry about people getting their hands crushed as much as they do now. I originally thought this was a fire picture, and then we decided that it was a train wreck. Uh, Almost every brick plant had a rail spur going to it to move the brick. And if you think that, 1 brick might weigh 5 to 10 pounds, if you're selling 1 million bricks, you've got a lot of weight to move. And so they had spur lines running up to the plant so that they could load cars and ship them out. Haven't really figured out exactly what happened here, but it looks like the locomotive ran into the back end of a car. And then, of course, everybody has to stand around looking at it. Floods. All right. Nothing like cold river water hitting a kiln that's heated to 2,000 degrees. I'll bet that was spectacular when it happened. It was also devastating to the plant. As you can imagine, probably everything had to be torn down and replaced because all the brick would be splintered and broken. And of course, anything in there was ruined. Alan managed to find the other picture of the same plant online, and we stuck it in there so you can kind of get an idea of how deep the water is. And looking at the sloping roof on the right of the bottom card and the sloping roof on the right of the top card, I would guess that the water is almost up to the top of those arches, which would mean it's at least 6 feet deep. You don't see an awful lot of flood pictures, but they are kind of neat. I threw in a couple of locomotives just in case we have any train lovers in the group. Again, something you don't see very often. These are small locomotives, and you notice they're only 2 sets of wheels. These were used to move the brick around the brickyard and possibly to move the clay from the clay pit up to the brick plant itself. A lot of the clay pits used cables instead to move stuff around. But these little locomotives are cute. I've seen a couple of them driving around the countryside looking for brick plants. You'll occasionally see one sitting by the roadside. Okay, here's a couple of clay pits. They were always proud of their holes in the ground. Of course, this is when they're working. When they stop being worked, they filled full of water and were nice fishing ponds for everybody. This picture on the right of the Coffeyville, not the Coffeyville, the Buffalo plant, is kind of confusing because they have rail going everywhere. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 or 8, or 4 different tracks running through there. A couple of them you can see have carts on them. It looks like the one that runs up the hill to the plant itself is a bigger gauge track. And I suspect that one was the one that they used to haul the clay up to be made into brick. I was at that plant, but at the time I wasn't thinking about looking in the shale pit, and so I didn't. That's where the picture of that pug mill came from. Now there's a big steam shovel. You notice that one's on rails to move around. And I think I'd be proud of that too if I had it. That obviously dug a lot of clay all at one time. Advertising stuff. A lot of postcards that you find are not just put out by the local town to talk about the industry in their town. There are a lot of cards that were put out by the brick plants themselves. And this example, the owner of this card has purchased a brick for the People's Church. These were given out for a lot of different kinds of things. And of course, the bottom one is an actual brick that said, I have a brick in the Third Christian Church in Topeka. I did a little research on the Third Christian Church because that's kind of a strange thing. You see a lot of firsts in a few seconds, but you don't find very many thirds of anything. But they actually started in the 1890s. I found an article that said that some janitor burned the church down in 1960 something. I'm assuming that this little miniature was made sometime in the 20s or 30s, but I haven't been able to find anything talking about them going on a new drive to build a new church. Something to keep looking for. Other advertising cards are kind of interesting, like the top one there, the Mountain Valley, says they have, what, 1 million cards in stock, or 1 million bricks in stock. That's a lot of brick for a town. Mountain Valley is, well, nowadays it's a couple of hundred people. Back when this card was made, it probably wasn't 1,000. So that's a small town to support a company that has 1,000 bricks in stock.
Million.
1 million block. Yeah. I, I had somebody email me one time. They said they found a brick that had 1 million written on it, and they were wondering whether it was a commemorative brick that they made 1 million bricks at this yard. And I wrote back and I said, there were plants that made 1 million bricks in a couple of days. So no, it was just somebody wrote 1 million on the brick for some reason, and we'll never know why. The bottom left card is advertising loading Kansas brick on a ship to take to Panama. And there's another card that goes with this that has just a large pile of brick. It's amazing. Once you get a brick on transport, either train, ship, or whatever, it doesn't cost very much to send it around the world. And in fact, when I was in Bahrain during Desert Storm, I found brick from Ireland. And I happened to know a guy that worked at the brick plant in Ireland. And I wrote to him and said, hey, I saw one of your bricks in Bahrain. Or actually, it was in Saudi Arabia. And he laughed and said, yeah, we ship them all over the world. So Coffeyville was doing the same thing and proud of it. The Williamset Brick Company was just a nice picture of the plant and advertising all the different kinds of brick that they made. In 1909, they had the centennial of Lincoln, and they came out with a whole set of Lincoln postcards. And this particular one was purchased by the Lincoln Park Coal and Brick Company of Springfield, Illinois. I found one other one out of the whole set, but there is, I don't know, probably 8 or so Lincoln cards. And it's hard to tell whether Lincoln Park Coal and Brick Company bought all the different cards or they just picked out a couple, 3, and stamped them and then mailed them out as advertising. But it's interesting. This is an advertisement for a brick machine. And what they're advertising is for a handheld machine to make concrete bricks. The machine itself, the guy standing on the left has got one of the brick machines sitting at his feet up on a little stand. And he goes over and pours concrete in it, smooths it off, and then carries it over where the third guy over has one that he's holding. And then the fourth guy is bending down and dumping the bricks out of the holder so that they dry on the ground. And the rest of the people, I suspect, are spectators. But when you're making bricks 3 at a time like that, it would take a long time to make enough bricks to build your house or whatnot. Another form of advertising, these are probably common type of advertising cards. They printed the cards up and then you put whatever kind of picture you wanted on them. These two just happen to be from the Junction City Sewer Pipe Company, and they were almost like stamps. They had perforated edges on them, and they stuck them in. One of them was Christmas, and the other one was a kind of a happy birthday card, which I thought was kind of strange, but who knows? They make them for everything. This is illustrating what I said earlier about the sewer pipe people always having a picture of their wares in their pictures. Here we have a huge pile of sewer pipe in front of this plant. This was from the AC Oaks plant in Springfield, Minnesota. Started to say Illinois there. I thought it was interesting because Mr. Oaks sent out a Christmas card in 1906 with a picture of his house saying Merry Christmas. And I've seen pictures of this card without the inscription on it as well. But the souvenir card there, that picture is gorgeous. When you blow it up, the detail is really nice. This is something kind of intrigued me. There were salesmen that would go around to all the brick plants selling stuff. And you would occasionally find giveaway things from 2 or 3 different plants that had the same item, that were the same item, that were obviously visited by the same traveling salesman. Well, somebody was selling calendars, and we had a long debate on these on whether they would send you a package with all 12 months in it or send you each card separately. Well, it turns out that both of these cards are postally used. So apparently they would spend the money, a penny on each card, to mail you a card once a month to keep, I guess, you fresh in their minds. And of course, you threw away the card when you got the old card when you got the new one. So I have never seen a set of these. In fact, these are the only 2 that I have. And of course, you got to have parades every now and then. But what kind of a float do you put in a parade for a brick plant? Mount Olive thought you put in a batch of drain tile. And I haven't really figured out what's on the other one, other than a lot of people standing. And maybe that's what it is. It's just a batch of people waving as they go by and say, hello. The back of this card says, the boss's wife. And so I'm going to end with this with the thought, who would buy this card? I can't imagine anybody mailing this to somebody. But anyway, she says, buy this card or I'll throw a brick at you. Thank you. Have we got any questions?
What's the closest brick plant to Wichita?
There were a couple in Wichita. No cards, nothing about it. If you go east, southeast Kansas had a lot of cards because they had clay and they had natural gas. And railroads came through. So those are the three things you need. Is you need a way to get rid of your brick, a way to fire them, and something to make them out of. And actually, southeast Kansas had shale, which is hardened clay, and it makes a very good brick. So you'll see a lot of companies that are shale brick companies insinuating that they make a good hard brick. Yes, go ahead. You had something?
Oh, I was gonna ask if you have any cards or heard of the Adel Brick Company?
Ada?
Adel, Iowa Brick Company. I
It's
don't
still
know if you-
functioning.
Yeah.
It's still functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you have any cards on there?
I think I do.
I was just
My
curious.
collection is over 1,000 cards right
1,000.
now. And I can't remember all of them. Now, one of our members brought his collection in today, and I looked through it and saw a lot of them that I didn't have. One thing about collecting brickyards is that there aren't very many of them out there. And so if you have a collection of 10 or 15 cards, chances are half of them I've never seen. So it's a really good thing. When I started collecting, I was fighting with a guy on eBay for cards, and I discovered that I knew him. He lived in Ohio, and so I called him and I said, "Hey, this is stupid, us fighting each other. So why don't you just take everything east of the Mississippi and I'll take everything west of the Mississippi." And so that's what we did. And the price we paid for cards went down tremendously. Now, the bad part about that is he got a lot of good cards that I don't have. And unfortunately, he died and his wife got rid of the cards before I had a chance. Now, I add digital pictures of them rather than the actual cards themselves. You all have the same problem I do, is my children have no interest in anything I've got. And so, why should I amass this huge pile of cards that they're gonna get rid of? Other than, it's the fun of finding them. Yeah, of course.
Thank you for starting off with New York, Hudson River, Brickyard.
I had a wonderful time. I traded a trailer load of brick to a gal in Martha's Vineyard. She wanted to put down a patio of Kansas brick. And she said, "What can I pay you for them?" And I said, "Another load of New York brick to come back to Kansas."
Well, I'll keep my eye out for them as I live in that area. But my understanding is that the Brickyards were all on the west side of the Hudson,
They're on both sides.
on both sides, okay. That's interesting. So the mud was equally,
Yeah.
I thought the railroad tracks may have had an impact on where Brickyards were.
They did, to some extent, but, the Hudson was a waterway, and so I suspect that most of the brick from New York came down by the Hudson. There were big conglomerates in New York that bought all this stuff and then resold it out again. This lady that I talked about trading with, I got there and she said, "Oh, I'm really sorry." She said, "The bricks I had saved out for you, somebody stole last week. And so I had to go get you some other ones, but they're not clean." And so I said, "Well, that's all right. I don't mind that." And so I got, I think it was about 110 different New York bricks out of that. I said, "How did you find 100 different bricks in a week?" He said, "Oh, it's really simple. You go to the garden supply places and they all had a dump truck load of bricks dumped out behind for people that buy bricks to put around their gardens and stuff like that. And because of this mixing of the bricks when they were shipped down, when they knock a building down, they might have 5 or 10 different kinds of brick in the same building. And so a dump truck would have 10 different kinds. So she just went to a number of different garden supply places and came up with 110 bricks in a week.
Yeah, I know a lot of brick supply places, so to speak, or gardens that have bricks, and you
Yeah.
look to see if the bricks are the same or different or whatever. And when Frank L. Baum went to school in Peekskill, it's a military school in Peekskill, he got off the steamer or barge or whatever he took to get there, and he would walk down this one path towards the school that was made of ballast bricks, and they were yellow. And New Yorkers believe that that's the, or Peekskill people believe that that's the yellow brick road of the story.
Yes.
You had said that people could order horse-produced brick or steam, they could pick.
Yes.
What would be the difference between the two? Was there any difference, or?
Well, it depends on whether you had a horse or a steam engine.
Oh, but I mean, I thought you could choose which one you wanted.
Yeah, you could.
Oh,
But, it's depending on what you had. If you had, I assume probably a horse was cheaper than a steam engine.
okay,
And if you already had the horse, why would you buy the steam engine?
okay.
So, yes,
This is gonna be a stupid question.
there's no stupid questions, there's stupid answers.
Were all of, did all of the mud or the dirt come from just around the plant that they, I mean, that sort of answered some that the mud came,
Yeah.
you had a pit, but like, say, for instance, on the Hudson, if you had 100 brick things, that'd like rip up the entire area, wouldn't it?
Oh, you're talking about how many miles up the Hudson? 50 miles maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were spread out, but a lot of them, when you go through and look, they were in little clumps. Peekskill, Haverstraw, I'm drawing blank, but anyway,
Yeah,
there were towns all up and down the river, and then there were brick plants in between the towns.
And so all of the pits were near the plant? Or
They
did
dug
get
the
their-
clay out of the river.
Oh.
Yeah, it was Hudson River clay. So, I mean, that was the advantage of them, is they could just take a dredge and dump out and pull in the clay and make bricks out of it.
So it was never visibly obvious that there was a pit.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily real obvious because the river filled in
Oh. Okay.
and went along with it.
Huh.
Jim, was there a standard size for bricks that were manufactured during the early
No,
part of the century?
I had on your question about getting brick, fire brick, because they were made to make certain specifications of heat temperatures, they would ship clay 100 miles. They would go find a specific clay called kaolin and mine it, and wherever it was where it was. And then they would haul it back to the plant. So fire brick, they did ship clay back and forth. Standard sizes, no. There are some general standard sizes, and then the engineering people have come up with the oversized bricks and everything else. The only standardized bricks there are fire brick. And that was out of necessity. There were roughly 1,000 brick plants in Kansas. Wow. And there were at least 220 towns that had a plant. So as this is normal all over the United States. There were a lot of brick plants, some of which only operated for a couple of years. The people selling the equipment would tell you, one of the horse-drawn type things, they could make 20 to 30,000 bricks a day. Now, that sounds like a lot of brick. A brick sold for anywhere from $7 to $10 or $12 a thousand. So 30,000 bricks at $10 a thousand is $300, which is still a lot of money. But you have to figure that out of that, you had to pay the salaries of the people, which was what, $1 a day or whatever, and then the transportation and the fuel and all the other stuff. And so, yeah, I'm sure it turned out that there were a lot of people that just went in over their heads and bought equipment and discovered they couldn't make it. The other thing that you find is that the same plant changed names. And it started out as one name, and then they would go out of business and somebody would buy it and start it up again, and then they would go out of business and somebody would buy it, and it would start up again. So you can find 3 different brick plants in the same physical location. And sometimes on your cars you find that.
The
Yes.
names on the brick,
Yes.
that is done after they lay the bricks down and then press something into it, or?
No, that one car to the fire where you saw all those strange machines in there, those are what were called represses. And what they would do after, they would take the brick coming out of the pug mill, cut into individual bricks, and they would take the raw brick and stick it in this thing, and it had 2 dies, because you got 2 hands. You stick them in, stamp down, I don't remember, like 30, 40,000 pounds of pressure. And then you would take them out and go. This is all before they had safety stuff.
Well, I understand, I have a little collection of bricks with names on them from various places, but occasionally you find a brick that is stamped, "Don't spit on the sidewalk."
Yes.
So I assume that various companies would specialize a few of those from time to time, or
No, those were made by the Coffeyville Vitrolite Brick Company.
all of them?
In Coffeyville, Kansas. If you go down southeast Kansas, you can find a lot of them,
Right.
but they weren't shipped out very far.
But I would think if a city was building a sidewalk, they wouldn't lay every brick with that
No,
emblem on it. They would want a certain number of them.
yeah, they just laid occasionally in the thing.
Yeah.
What was happening was we had a state public health officer that was running a campaign against tuberculosis. And he convinced the Coffeyville plant to make these bricks to put in the sidewalk. He also had a swat the fly campaign too, but that one never took off. And he also banned common drinking cups. So he was really a forward-thinking person, but the don't spit bricks are what really everybody knows about.
Yeah, they're the more expensive ones in the antique store too.
Well, I had a guy come in, our club has meets a couple, 3 times a year where we get together and exchange bricks. And we don't put a price on our bricks. So what we do is you just put them out on the ground and say, if you want one, take it. And I had a guy come in many years ago. We had a meet down in Independence, and he had a truckload of don't spit on the sidewalk bricks that were all just like brand new. And I said, where did you find these? And he said, well, they were the edges of the sidewalk. So they were laid on their edge with the printing protected. And when they tore the sidewalk out, the whole sidewalk on both sides was don't spit on the sidewalk bricks. Now, why they did that, God only knows. Yeah.
We still have don't spit on the sidewalk bricks in Hutchison. They're still in the sidewalks.
Yes,
Bricks that were used in streets,
yes,
were they a different dimension?
yes. Paving brick, normal brick are roughly 2 by 4 by 8. I mean, that's what they start out. When the brick dries, it shrinks as the moisture is taken out of it. So that's why you have a problem with matching individual sizes up from different companies, because they all dried at different rates. But paving brick were 4 by 4 by 8. So they were twice as thick. And most of them, well, a lot of them were repressed. There was a huge fight going on between different companies on whether the repressed brick, which was stamped in an actual uniform size and shape, and nice smooth sides and everything else, besides their name on it, was better than one that was just a tube that came out and cut off. And if you've ever noticed paving brick, they usually have some kind of a knob or something, or bars or something on one side of it. That's to space the bricks out when they lay them. So they laid them on their side. And then after they laid the bricks, they swept the pavement with a mixture of cement powder, dry cement, and then watered it down. And that was to seal the bricks so that the moisture couldn't get down underneath them and cause them to upheave.
The people that laid the bricks in the streets,
Mhm.
I can't imagine doing that.
There were guys, you remember what the record was? There was a guy that had the record for the most bricks laying. And he would go through and he had 3 or 4 people bringing him bricks as he laid them. It was, like 20 or 30,000 a day.
Wow.
Unbelievable, yeah. But they had a system the way they laid them, and they went through it real quick.
I've seen some videos on the internet or whatever about these new machines that they're making that you just put them in and it kind of almost, it just slides down a little ramp and it
Comes out
and it
street.
just kind of comes out as a street. So they're like Jim said, there's always somebody inventing something new.
Okay.
Thank you.